Hello, I'm Alan Furstenberg.
And I'm Mark Tucker, and we are Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs. How's your week been, Mark?
Oh, it's been busy but good, I think.
I hear you on busy but good.
I don't know. Some days we're like busy late, and I'm not so sure of myself, but overall, it's good.
Well, it's always good to hear. It's been fun the past bunch of weeks. We've been talking a lot about CMS stuff, but I figure we also should catch up a little bit on some news that's been coming out recently. That's in this case not specific related to voice, but kind of very adjacent.
Yeah. So let me tell you my quick little history story of AWS and web endpoints, things that I can do WebSockets against. So years ago, what is this, 2017, 2016, when I first started doing voice stuff, then I didn't know anything about AWS. So that was part of the hill that I had to climb and learn. So I learned Lambda because that seemed like it made a lot of sense.
And we should remember back then, the built-in functions weren't available. So it's not like, as part of the console, you couldn't just, switch to that code editor and edit code in there. That wasn't available yet.
Yeah, there definitely wasn't that hosted deployment option was not available. That's only been the last couple of years. So, I had to learn about what Lambda was. And I think one of the first templates I did was a project that was like a starter template for creating a skill hosted in Lambda that used serverless, because I don't even think the serverless framework was part of some of the examples back then. And so serverless is just a way of hosting or deploying your webhooks or web functions to the cloud. And so, and I didn't really have to worry about it because I was doing Alexa, and Alexa talked directly to Lambda functions through the Alexa Skills Kit. There's an interface for that. And so for the longest time, I was good to go. I didn't have to worry about anything else. And then along came a project that I was doing Jovo, and I was doing a Google action and an Alexa skill both. And in order to do the Google action, I needed to talk to a webhook, post to an HTTPS endpoint someplace. And I had my code running in Lambda, and I figured out that you could do API gateway in front of that. And so created a WEST endpoint in front of the Lambda, so then I could have a Google action too. And so that's kind of how it started. And then for a while, as things progressed, that was really the only option for API gateway.
Right. And with API gateway, now I use API gateway in a couple of projects that I have for clients. You only, in this case, needed to set up one API endpoint, right?
Yeah, I just needed a post. I didn't need any of the other rest. I didn't need to get a put or a delete or any of that stuff. So there was lots of configuration and functionality that was there that was pretty powerful that I didn't need at all. I just needed a quick pass through to post to some endpoint. So that's so I felt like there was a lot that was there, but that I didn't really need. And then there was an improvement to API gateway. Now you had a second option. It was an HTTP option, which was slimmer and less expensive and easier to configure, and then became the recommended way of having a web front end on webhook interface into your Lambda. So that became the recommended way. And so then as projects progressed that I needed to do Google Actions or even Bixby capsules, then that needed to be exposed through API Gateway, and I chose HTTP as the option for that. So that's kind of the way it's been until just recently.
And just recently, so what is the announcement that we got from them? It's within the past couple of weeks.
So there is Lambda function URLs. So what you'd end up having to do is that you would set up a Lambda, the old way, you'd set up a Lambda, you'd configure something in API Gateway, and then you would connect those. And you had the charges for things going through API Gateway, and you had the charges for using of the Lambda function. Now all the configuration is just in Lambda. It does a lot less, and there's like some like specific use cases of why you would use Lambda URLs, but it allows you to have, once again, some sort of a WebSocket connection into your Lambda. You just configure it right there in Lambda, and the only thing that you're charged for is the use of the Lambda function.
And I found this kind of funny. When I first was exposed to AWS Lambda, I had already been using Google's rough equivalent, and I say rough equivalent, which on the Google Cloud Platform side is called Cloud Functions.
Right.
And I'd use Cloud Functions, but I'd mostly been using it through a different product called Cloud Functions for Firebase. And for those of you that don't know what Firebase is, Firebase started as another company. Google bought them, that provided a real-time NoSQL database, sort of like a JSON database, but not quite. Close. But its big feature was that you would attach listeners to it, and the listeners would get notifications as parts of the database changed.
So kind of a pub sub, kind of a data store.
It's implemented using WebSockets, and there were all sorts of really neat elements to it. I still love Firebase, but that was a subject for a couple of episodes ago. When they bought them, though, they kind of changed what Firebase represented. So Firebase moved from just a database to a full platform meant for mobile and web developers. So it provided a bunch of different things for developers. And a lot of them were really just kind of simplified front ends to the cloud backend. The impression I get is the rough AWS equivalent now is Amplify.
I kind of get that feeling too. I don't know enough about
I don't know
either of them to compare, but yeah, I can kind of see that.
It's a rough equivalent. It's not exact comparison, but it's a rough equivalent. So one of the features that they offered as kind of a simplified version of Cloud Functions is Cloud Functions for Firebase. And they simplified it in a lot of different ways. One of the ones that I found most interesting, though, and both of them actually offered this up front, is that although there are a bunch of event-based hooks, so you could, your function would be triggered, for example, when you save data into Firebase. They also right off the bat had HTTP hooks. So there was a URL right off the bat that you would get, and it would be provisioned for HTTPS right off the bat. So that was always there. The other thing that was really cool is that the interface for it on the JavaScript side looked a shocking amount like Express, which is a node package for running servers. Yeah. To the point where Express middleware could be plugged in without too much difficulty. There was some middleware that was automatically there. There were other things that were all already configured for you. But there was a shocking amount that looked like Express. And the reason was because they were using Express under the hood.
That makes sense.
So it looked very much, not just from the outside, looked like an HTTP server, but what you were running, what you wrote, looked a lot like an HTTP server, which was, and when I needed to start running some things for Lambda, I was surprised. I'm like, wait, what's this event thing? I'm running HTTP. Why do I need an event? What's going on here? Yeah. So that was some confusion on my part when I moved over.
Yeah, that is interesting. So so you could use one of these Firebase functions. You could use that as the thing that hosted code, and you could go have a Google action go against it, or?
Well, yes. In fact, that was the recommended way for a long time, still is, for how to create a webhook, is that you just have associated with the same project that your action would be associated with. You could just set it up as a webhook. and you have the URL for that. One of the other neat things about the Firebase integration is that Firebase also has something called Firebase hosting, which again gives you a URL. You can dump files there and it hosts them just like any other web server. And if you have a custom domain, you can point your custom domain at Firebase hosting, and it just works with the right HTTPS certificate. It's really, really easy and straightforward.
Yeah.
One of the other neat things, though, was that you could also point URL paths at the Firebase hosting URL to a cloud function. So you would have the equivalent of dynamic pages could be generated, or dynamic whatever could be generated at the same site as your static pages were located.
Oh, okay.
And that was really, so
yeah, that's really powerful. And
right.
And it seems like they tried to bundle it up to make it as easy as possible to just have it work altogether.
A lot of things with Firebase are just make them work.
Yeah.
It hides a lot of the really complicated parts of what Google Cloud is trying to do. And Cloud offers the same features just under 3 different places for, in the same, in similar but different ways that Amazon gives you all the features, just, you got to put it together yourself.
Yeah. And sometimes they give you different options. So in this case, now you've got 3 different options. It's like, do I need a REST endpoint? Do I need a more powerful HTTP endpoint, or do I just need some webhook that's going to go directly to my Lambda? And and there's different pros and cons of those, and different capabilities. And one of the things I liked about serverless framework is that once you define what that hosting thing is going to be, it's not a lot of work to define, and then you can just deploy your zip up and deploy your skill and action code to Lambda and have an API gateway configured. And now it seems like right out of the box, even like day one, it seemed like serverless had the ability to now take advantage of these Lambda URLs. It's like they knew they were coming, and they worked to get that functionality out. So that should be something that if you're done serverless or in the past or want to consider serverless, then that would be an easy way to deploy your code.
One of the things that I think you and I talked about in the past, and I'm kind of curious how this new framework handles it, is in validating requests. So one of the things that you need to do when you get a request that comes in via webhook is you need to make sure that it actually comes from the Alexa or the Google Assistant service. And they do that by providing authentication information in the header. And I know under API Gateway, we had a way that we could validate that.
What I've seen, and I'd have to look. I think like Jovo handles it on its own. I think it just handles it. Because what typically happens is that if you're using Jovo and you're needing to host it, then there's actually a Slim Express front end that intercepts things, and then it gets the JSON and then passes it through the whole pipeline that is Jovo and handles it that way. But there is, I know, like an Alexa verifier middleware that you can add to Express that takes care of that. So some of that, so it seems like that actually happens on the end. So it actually makes it to your Lambda, and then the Lambda itself verifies it. Whereas I know, like if you had the original API Gateway REST option, there were a chance to intercept things before you actually even hand it off. So API Gateway would stop it before it even made it to Alexa.
Interesting. And that's one of the features that Cloud Functions doesn't have. So when I wrote Multivocal, I had to implement it in Multivocal in the same way. One of the neat bits about that, though, is on the Google side, and I think on the Alexa side as well, I don't remember now suddenly. On the Google side, one of the JWT fields, so it hands over a JSON web token which is signed and you can validate. And one of the claims in the web token is the project that it's running from.
Interesting.
So Multivocal makes an assumption, unless you tell it otherwise, that your action and your cloud function are running in the same project. Since it's running in that project on cloud functions, it knows which project it's running in. So it can automatically validate it without you having to set anything.
Oh, that's clever.
Otherwise, you need to set, well, here's what I'm expecting for this field.
Yeah.
But
no, that is interesting. I don't recall. I think the checks that you have to do on the Alexa side is more with the fact that that the request has come in within a certain time frame. Yeah. It used to be on the early days that there was like an additional validation that you had that you could set on your I think it was actually on the Alexa Skills Kit side of things, where you could say this connector thing that's connecting Alexa to the Lambda had a thing where you could put like the skill ID and it would reject traffic if it wasn't the right skill ID, which is kind of interesting because then it kind of took on the air, at least for me, is that skill ID is something that you want to kind of keep secret because that's one of the things that would prevent,
right. But isn't hacking. That skill ID exposed in the directory?
It's not exposed in the directory.
Interesting. Okay.
No, because what in the skill store itself, it's not exposed. But where they did expose it is quick links.
Oh, right.
And so at first I'm just like, quick links, are you sure that you want to be exposing this Alexa skill ID? But I've gone back and looked, and I don't see that same setting is there to limit the endpoint from listening to is just working with just a specific skill ID.
We'll have to look this up and schedule it for another another session because now I want to go into all the details
of verifying
of how you verify. I mean, because it's a legitimate question: is how do we verify this sort of thing? But certainly, I think this update to Lambda, it's exciting, because it does mean that you can more easily just host dynamic content or host an API or, as we, especially on the voice field, it's host a skill or an action.
Yeah. And this list I'm looking at, I think there's a lot of things that you can do. So with this Lambda URL, you can't do WebSockets. So if that's something that you need, or if you need extra power and control, then you probably need one of the API gateway options. But it is good for webhooks, which is exactly what we're using them for Alexa and Google. APIs that are built with for backend frameworks, single function microservices, so something that's very simple. And so some of those things would take advantage of, like one of the things I noticed right off the bat is that the response timeout on the API gateway side is, I think, max 29, 30
seconds.
Whereas
ask me how I know that.
Have you hit that a couple of times?
Yeah, once or twice.
Once or 200. And the response timeout for these new Lambda URLs is 15 minutes. So you could do a lot more processing and waiting for responses. You can connect things together. They're definitely targeting it towards, you could put things into a database, which would trigger a Lambda, which could then put or you could put things into a queue, process that, throw that on the event bridge. There's all this orchestration work. You have to go to extra work if you want to have domains on function URLs, because they give you like a standard URL that you have to use. And I think if you're going to want to do like custom domains, I think you have to then have that funnel through like CloudFront or something like that.
Which is pretty normal for, that makes sense. Going back to the 15 minutes though, that's interesting, and again, this isn't useful for us in voice, because
you get 7 seconds.
We got 7 seconds. But it does remind me of one of the things that, again, I discovered an interesting difference between Cloud Functions and Lambda. And that's that, in Cloud Functions, you can keep processing after you send the response back.
Yeah.
Whereas in Lambda, you send the response back and it shuts down right afterwards, which is interesting, because then when you get another request in, sometimes it picks up back where it left off.
Yeah, there is a setting, and I'm trying to remember if it was like an express setting or if there's a Lambda specific setting that kind of helps with that.
Oh, interesting.
But the symptom of that would be that you're doing some testing and you're checking logs, and you don't ever and you don't see the end of the session, and then 20 minutes later you do it again, and the end of the previous session happens right before the beginning of the current session or something, and you're like, no.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, and I understand why they do it, and it makes a lot of sense. It's just interesting because this is a difference that if you're expecting a particular behavior, the two of them do it slightly differently, which is
interesting. I wonder if hitting an endpoint on a Lambda function would keep it warm.
I mean, in theory it would, but still the session, you don't know how the session would behave.
Yeah, but in some cases I'm just concerned about keeping the response to I mean, it's not that big of a deal. Things have been improved quite a bit since I started, but there were different concerns, like I'm hitting my Lambda and it's got a cold start time, and it's hitting an API which is also serverless, which is hitting a cold start time.
Yeah.
And then you're like, that's 7 seconds right there. Thank you for playing.
Yeah. No, that's a great, yes. Yeah, there are there are APIs that I work with that I know we need to keep them warm.
Yeah.
And suffer the cost penalty for it. And that's also an interesting thing, is that Lambdas kind of fit in this place in between hosted and Kubernetes and Docker and Lambda. So we've got the VM kind of environment and Lambda all the way down at the other end. Yeah. Google has a couple of products in between there, which are interesting, which have scale to 0 or scale to 1 semantics with different cost factors to them.
Yeah.
And the really interesting part is that these days, Cloud Functions is built on top of those. It's just a very managed version of something else, which is a managed version of something else, which is a managed version of Kubernetes, which is a managed version of Google has layers all the way down. So, I think it's a great development. It's always fun to see what goes on in the serverless space in general. And, I saw a lot of people talking about this, and I'm like, that's cool. That's a nice new addition. I hope that voice developers take advantage of it, because I think it's well designed for us. But I think it's an evolution, not a revolution.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I haven't had a chance to use it, but I would assume that it's easier than what I've used before, and those were fairly easy in the end too. So it's not going to simplify your life dramatically, but configuring one less service and paying for one less service is
always better. Yeah. So, and again, I think it's good that every so often we stop in and look at what some of these other tools that are adjacent to our voice development projects and how we use them. I think that's only a good thing to discover.
Yeah. So it's there's the voice experience that we're building, and then there's like the foundation of all the things that it needs to run. And so sometimes it's good to put a spotlight on those.
Yep. So as always, love to hear what other people think, what other people use. Are there other services that you really love to use to host your skills and actions? We'd love to hear about them. You can, as always, drop a comment below, or you can find Mark and I on Twitter, on LinkedIn or at Voice Lunch.
Yep. And catch us on another episode of Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs. Have a great week, Mark.
Yep, you too. Thank you.